Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
We're a little higher up today.
Yes, we're not sitting on the floor. We love that.
Yeah, we got chairs and
And we're sitting in them.
yep, and a very high-tech thing that you may not have heard of called boxes, which is what my laptop is sitting on. So that's where we're at.
And just to get it out of the way, there have been some
Oh yeah,
renovations.
there have been some hair changes. I haven't seen this part of my face since 2008.
I haven't seen this part of my head ever.
Ever. All right.
So, yeah, we're thriving in
Oh yeah,
quarantine.
we're learning. We're growing. We're changing.
Yeah.
Sophie, you had something you wanted to tell the good people before we get started.
Yes. So what we've sort of decided to do is have a different charity for every week that we do this that we're trying to support, or a different fundraiser of some kind. And so what we wanted to call your attention to this week is actually a personal fundraiser. It is for an immigrant family, the Morales family in New Jersey, who have been hit pretty hard by COVID-19. Two of their family members, two brothers who I think they weren't even 50, they both recently passed away due to COVID-19, and their families are really struggling now. So they are raising money to help with funeral expenses, and also to help the family who's left behind. Obviously, nobody is really working right now, so it's, I think, been a big struggle for a lot of people. So we wanted to call your attention to this GoFundMe, and I think we put the link
Yep,
in the description.
there's a link to the GoFundMe in the description. There's also a link to an article in Time about the family if you want to read more about them. Their situation is definitely worth looking into, and they definitely need our support.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, there are a ton of people who have been hit by this, and this is just one family that we wanted to draw attention to. So I hope you will check out that fundraiser. Look at their GoFundMe. The link is in the description. So,
Cool. I think where possible when we bring up these causes each week, we're gonna try to stay a little bit more small scale and personal, right?
yeah, because like people can look up on their own,
The big
more
ones.
major organizations to donate to.
And on
So.
top of that, we can make a real difference in these much smaller situations, right? So if you have the money, if you are willing to support the Morales family, go check out those links, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for considering it. So, moving on, I think the first thing, as always, is make sure that you are in the Discord, in the live channel, when we get to participation and questions. That's where we're going to be checking. And aside from that, I think we can get started with a submission from last week.
I haven't heard this one yet. I'm really excited.
It's very good. I will not read the whole thing because it's a little bit too long, but it is very cool and I'm really excited about it. So can you just quickly recap what the assignment was?
So last week we were talking about relationships and building relationships that have a conflict set up in them. So I asked you all to either write a dialogue between two characters that have a relationship with an inherent conflict, or to write an outline of how a relationship between two characters with a conflict might progress. Right? Does that seem right?
That seems right. So we have the submission from Mika, I believe, or it could be Micah. I don't know. And so there's like a quick little summary and then like a section of the story. And I won't read the whole section because it's a little bit too long, but it's really good. So the background we get is Ahab Galarar, under the identity of Morgan Snow, operates as a high-end robber and spy in New Elysium, underground corporate
You need some help?
corporatocratic
Corporatocratic. Yeah.
yeah
Corporatocratic.
city-state of Venus. Of difficult and unstable heritage, he grew up in Solace, the lowest levels of the city, but so did Shaska, and they found each other. However, under mutual agreement, they broke up. But that was long before the persona of Morgan Snow was born. Months later, Shaska asks to meet up after Morgan is injured by debtors. So that's our quick description. I'm just going to read a portion of this. Ahab, you look like shit. You don't necessarily look good either, asshole. And look at me. Am I bringing it up? No. Morgan scoffed at the man who dared to even comment on his appearance. While Morgan sure had a couple of bandages, the man standing in front of him looked like he just took his own off. His hair seemed cut recently, too. It actually surprised Morgan how much cleaner he looked. That's probably what a couple of months do to normal people. He had a stronger build, broader shoulders, but still just as small, just reaching Morgan's shoulder. The same bronze complexion and dark eyes, but add to that a new scar or two, like the one that split his right eyebrow in half. The man retrieved the cigarette from his lips and opened his arms wide just for Morgan. What he said earlier was a lie. The man looked far better than him. It was the best Shaska had ever looked. Couldn't keep yourself out of trouble? The man approached him for a way too dangerous hug, but Morgan stopped him before he could body slam into his sore wounds. No, actually. Morgan still ended up wincing around his arms, no matter how careful his friend was. He looked down at him when they pulled apart. You? Well, I'm doing a better job at staying alive than you, that's for sure. Shut up, Shaska. Hand me a cigarette. He procured him a thin roll of dried leaves whose origin Morgan didn't care much about. He barely even glanced down before it was lit in his grasp. He inhaled and breathed out a controlled cloud of smoke. Shaska chuckled when he watched Morgan sigh of relief and rest against the tagged wall. No, seriously, tell me what you've been up to. Shaska leaned a bit closer, an arm reaching out to wrap itself around Morgan's shoulder. Ahab didn't mind. Surviving. A couple of gigs here and there. It does the job paying bills. Is this how you ended up beaten up, perchance? You know how it is down in Solace. Morgan blew another puff of smoke. When he inhaled, I don't see you around anymore. Did you find a new, maybe even a stable job in this economy? Shaska threw the butt at his feet. He stomped on it as he looked up into Morgan's eyes. I applied for the Intravenous Academy months back. It caught Morgan off guard, the cough pushing the rest of the smoke out of his lungs in surprise. Shaska paused, but kept going. A few months later, and here I am, a full-fledged intravenous judge, and my first assignment is in a couple of days. While Shaska's smile grew in waiting, anticipating any words of joy or encouragement, Morgan's skin drained of the little color it still had. Unfortunately, I'm going to stop there because I don't think we have much more time, but it's very good. It keeps being very good. And one of the things that I really like about it is that it establishes this relationship that starts from before the story starts. Mm-hmm. So we very much get a sense of their shared history and how well they know each other and what they remember about each other. But also we're getting the seeds of the built-in conflict already, mm-hmm. right? They started from one place. Now he has this new job. And it's causing a lot of tension in their relationship right off the bat. Mm-hmm. I also just think the descriptions are really good.
Yeah.
The dialogue is great.
One thing that this does extremely well, which is related to what we're going to talk about today, but we're not really going to get into the nitty-gritty with, is does an excellent job of taking all of that background information and demonstrating it through the scene so that we don't have to sit through a lecture to start, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't feel like exposition-y. Mm-hmm. It mm-hmm. just like it quite gracefully sort of weaves in backstory.
Yeah, absolutely.
Through description and stuff. So well done.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was Mika.
Mika or Micah. I'm sorry, I don't know. All right. But really good job. I love it.
All right. Are we ready to get started? I think
let's get started.
About it. Okay. Let me make sure the right windows are open. They are. Is this going to work?
It must be really nerve-wracking to share your screen suddenly with hundreds of people.
I have I to this day have a heart attack every time I do it with my classes.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to do it.
And like that's on my work laptop. There's nothing on there. Anyway, today we're talking about how to think about world building or build the metaphorical swing set while you're metaphorically riding it, but not literally, or you might die.
I love these like parentheticals that you're into doing these days.
Yeah, this is sort of my current artistic movement. One thing that I want to clarify as we talk about this is that there's a ton that can be said about world building. Over the course of this, I'm actually going to recommend a couple games and a book for you to check out if you'd like. And it's worth noting that that book, which is right over my shoulder, I'll show it to you later, is like 700 pages long. It's really, really long, and it's all about writing imaginative fiction. We could not go through everything it has to say, even though I think it's fantastic. in an hour. So really what we're focusing on today is a broad process, a way of thinking about world building to kind of help you out, especially if you were just starting off getting a world set up, right? So the way that I broke down our basic process, Sophie, this is brand new news for you because we didn't talk about this extensively before this.
No, I don't know what's going on. I don't have a clue.
Yet somehow your slides ended up here. Our broad process for world building is we start simple, we make sure to leave blank spaces, and we ask questions, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. First, you got to start simple. This is a tough one to keep in mind. That quote, draw maps, leave blanks, is from a game called Dungeon World by Sage Latour and Adam Coble. Very, very much worth your time. Even though it is a tabletop game, I've learned a lot about just good storytelling and how to keep having fun telling a story through it. But the experiment that I want you to think about for a sec is ask yourself, how much do you know about this place here, this Earth? How much do you know about it, Seth?
Some?
Can you tell me everything that happens on Earth?
Absolutely not.
If I point to this continent right here, can you tell me who that is?
Nope.
No? Okay. How about your country, the United States?
What about, I know some stuff about it.
You know some stuff about
Yes.
it. That's true. Do you know where Arkansas is?
Kinda.
Kinda? Okay. All right. That's impressive.
Oh my god, don't ask me questions about geography in front of other people. I'm like panicking.
I was that was a very specific, narrow read at Sophie, whose geography continually astounds me. What about your town? I'm not going to say what town we live in, but we live close to Boston.
Yes.
Right? Do you know everything about everyone in Boston?
No.
No, right?
I honestly, the reason I'm struggling is because I couldn't figure out if you were genuinely asking me or if I was the stooge. Like, I think I'm the stooge either way. I'm gonna go.
No, please stay, stooge.
Okay.
Ask yourself, why don't you know everything about these places? Why don't you know everything about these places?
There's too many things.
There's just too many things, right? So this diagram is not to scale. This is your brain. This is the world. This is an image that came up when I did a Google image search for big and small. You have to resist the urge to know everything. It feels responsible to come up with your whole atlas, to come up with everything that everybody in the culture does, etc. But it's actually extremely limiting. It is not a good idea. If our world is too complicated for us to fully understand and we want to create worlds that feel like ours, not even you should be able to fit everything about your world in your head. And if you can, it's probably too simple to be believable. So one of the big things we're going to talk about is start with a seed and then be ready to think on the fly. One thing I'll say a couple times throughout this is remember that when you're building a world, you're planting a seed, not a tree. If you're working in an existing world, you've got to deal with the whole tree. If you are building a world, you're starting with a seed. Okay? Sophie, I believe that's you.
I hate this slide. That's really gross.
Our seed.
Ew.
I don't understand what you mean.
Ew.
As a person who works in a public school,
you are legally not allowed to know what I mean.
I'm contractually obliged to not get this joke.
Got that. Okay, copy. All right, so we want to talk about an example from the Penumbra. So again, apologies to anybody who might be watching this who isn't familiar with the Penumbra. Just do your best to follow along. So when we started writing the Second Citadel storyline, as many of you may know, we didn't actually plan it to be a series. Mm-hmm. We were just going to tell this one story. And we came up with it by coming up with this one character, Sir Mark. He is a disabled man who wants to be accepted as a knight. And so his plan is to slay the most terrible monster he can to prove to the court that he is more capable than any of them. So that was just our starting point. It was a character idea that we had. We thought mm-hmm. it'd be interesting to tell a story about a knight who is disabled. So coming up with that character idea made us ask a lot of questions that ended up helping us develop the universe. So we're going to make a tree. So we start with that character of Sir Mark. He's disabled. He wants to slay monsters. He wants to prove himself as a knight to the court. So that tells us something right off the bat, which is that the court is not very accepting. And we know that just because if it was, then he wouldn't have to prove himself, right? Mm-hmm. So that already told us something about the world. And it also tells us that there are a lot of monsters nearby for him to slay. So already we have two things that we now know about this universe just because we came up with a character.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are many monsters nearby, then we think, okay, then I guess monsters naturally inhabit this land. Um, Kevin, what have you done?
Sorry, I fixed it.
Okay. And we also came from that, we also determined, okay, so the second citadel, which is where the people live, is at war with monster kind. We're learning more. And from there, we start to think about, okay, well, why are they at war with monster kind? Maybe they've pushed into the monster's habitat. And now that they're at war, well, maybe the monsters are planning an attack on the second citadel, so we're learning a lot more. And that's just from following one of these branches, right? So what if we look at the other one? The court is not very accepting. Now, just to be clear, like as we follow the branches and the twigs down, those aren't necessarily things that have to follow from where we started. It's something that could follow from where we started and something that we picked. So if the court is not very accepting, maybe that means that the queen is accepting, but she doesn't always know exactly what's happening with the knights. And it also tells us that maybe the second citadel abides by conservative values if they're not very accepting of Sir Mark. And then that might help us come up with what are those values. So, okay, strength and unity is one of them. Monsters bad, humans good. And don't be gay. And so, I mean, if you sort of follow each one to the preceding one, it's not that big a leap. But it's kind of a leap if you started from the beginning, right? So, like, it's kind of a leap to get don't be gay from the character of Sir Mark, but we started somewhere and then we sort of followed that those branches outwards, and that can be one way to develop a universe.
What's really nice about this method, I think, is that, if you're building a world and you're worried that it's just a bunch of pieces that don't really connect, starting with a seed and then growing out from that seed ensures everything connects, right? It is very, very weird now with the direction the Second Citadel has gone, now that Mark is one of many characters, that the world exists because we were building a world for him, right? And then as we added more and we got to different branches in here and we started adding other characters, we started building onto the world for them too.
Right, and and you can kind of look at any piece of that and that might spark another idea for another character, right? So one that ended up sparking a lot for us is the piece that is the second citadel abides by conservative values. And okay, if we know that, then we can, going back to our previous workshop topics, then we can build in a lot of character and character conflict if we know that they're existing in a world with very conservative values, right?
Absolutely. So another one of those suggestions in our process was to make sure that you leave blank spaces. This is another quote from the Dungeon World manual kind of explaining the draw maps leave blanks idea, which is when you draw a map, don't try to make it complete. Leave room for the unknown. As you play, you'll get more ideas and inspiration to work with. Let the maps expand and change. There are a lot of benefits to blank space. It's really interesting that we think of blank space as being so irresponsible that for some reason the author needs to know everything about the world, when I would argue that without blank space, your world is probably too rigid to adapt to the story. Right? Yeah. For our purposes, we need to leave a lot of blank spaces because we need to write so many stories so fast that we need room to mess around with the world. Right?
It's really interesting, and I think that people stress out about it a lot. I know that people have very straightforwardly come to us and be like, do you have a plan?
Right.
Do you know where this is going? Really worried about it.
Yep.
And sometimes at least sometimes we don't have our final answer.
Right. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Yeah. But with blank space, you can tailor the situation to your characters more effectively. Sophie talked about that a second ago. You can give yourself freedom to replace a good answer with a great answer. And you can also just have more fun in the long term. I'll tell you from experience, if you sit down and you know everything about your story before you start, you are going to get so bored by the time it's over that it's going to be painful to write it.
Right, then it's just painting by numbers. It's not like there's
Exactly.
no sense of discovery.
I think Robert Frost said, "No surprise for the reader, no surprise for the writer." Right.
Mm.
And so like you've got to be willing to surprise yourself. So tailor the world to your characters. Remember a couple weeks ago we talked about Nightmare at 20,000
This
feet. This guy
guy.
Bob. In our second workshop we talked about how his monster was
Was that 2
specifically
weeks
built for him.
ago?
That was 2 weeks ago.
Time is meaningless.
Oh, 100%.
Meaningless. Okay, cool, great.
Time is so meaningless in quarantine that was simultaneously 2 weeks ago and next week.
Jeremy Bearimy.
Jeremy Bearimy. So the world is specifically built for him. Blank spaces in your world allow you to do the same. Imagine if in building Bob's world, somewhere along the way, during the grand design, they wrote something down that said furry monsters can't be on airplanes, right? Suddenly Bob loses his perfect monster. You cannot build that situation for him anymore, right? You wanted to talk about an example from Martians.
Yes, okay. So here is an example from the Juniverse about how the world can come out of an initial character. So, the lady detective, Juno Steele. So, something that we knew about him right off the bat, just because it was something that we were interested in doing, was that, well, okay, to be fair, we did not know right off the bat that he was going to be non-binary, which is honestly another thing about leaving blank spaces, actually.
Right.
We were able to fill that in later. But we did know right off the bat that he was going to be bisexual, and we also knew that we happened not to be interested in telling a story where that was a struggle for him. And I'm not saying that that is a bad type of story to tell. That is a perfectly fine type of story to tell. It just wasn't what we wanted to do. So that already told us something about the world that he lived in. It told us that it was different than this world, because in the world that we live in, it's not going to happen that you're going to be queer without it ever coming up, being any type of a source of struggle, never seeing anything bad about that in media. Like, it just won't happen. So we know that his world is different from ours in that way. However, we also knew that we were interested in him being a character who was depressed. And that kind of had partially to do with the fact that we were starting out with that type of like hard-boiled noir detective, and we kind of figured, okay, for someone to behave in this way, they must be very depressed. And so we knew that that was going to be something about his character. But then if that was going to be a major struggle for him, then okay, that his society couldn't have made comparable strides in addressing mental health issues. And then we also knew that some of the things we wanted him to deal with are things like real estate conspiracies, which is very classic noir, and very rich clientele, but that also a very typical noir thing is like some parts of the city are really, or parts of the city are very run down, and so that means that, like us, he too is living in a capitalist hellscape. And from all that, then we have built actually quite a lot about the world,
Right.
just from what must necessarily be the case because of this one character, which is that you have a gender utopia, but sort of otherwise a dystopia, which is pretty specific, and very different from our world.
Right. I think that one question that's always worth asking, and that this method really helps with, is you should always be asking yourself, why this character? Why is this the main character of the story? And when you kind of build the world around the character, you have already answered that question, right? They are the perfect character for this situation. Nobody on the plane besides Bob could be the main character of that story. It wouldn't make any sense, or wouldn't hit as hard. This may be raising some questions for you all, like, wait, Kevin and Sophie, are you saying that you don't know all the answers? So, do we know all the answers? Yeah, we do. Don't give me that face. The short answer is no. Knowing all the final answers is not cheating, and I'm going to explain to you why. I know right now many of you are probably thinking, "Oh, let's watch Kevin blow smoke for 10 minutes." I'm pretty convinced I can persuade you. Anytime that we're presenting the world or a mystery, I think about it as making the audience a promise. If you break that promise, you're going to upset the reader, but it's important for you to remember what you actually promised them. Did you ever actually say, I promise I already know all of the final answers to your questions? I don't think so. I think what you said is more like, I promise your questions have satisfying answers. which sounds the same, but there's an important difference. So I want you to imagine this. If I show you a box and I promise you that there's money in the box that I will give to you, if I later open the box and there's nothing inside, how would you feel?
I'd be pissed.
Yeah, and reasonably, right? You'd hit me, I'd hit me.
Whenever I'm pissed, it's reasonable.
Well, we're gonna move on to the next slide. Now imagine I put $1 in the box to start. I never lied to you, so when I open the box and you get the dollar, you're not going to feel cheated, right? You might be a little underwhelmed. I tell you money, you're imagining the stars, and it's $1, right? Now imagine that I put $1 in the box to start, and then while we were doing whatever happens between putting the box down and giving you the money, I found $100 in my pocket, and I switched them, and then when I opened the box, I gave you $100.
Yeah.
Right? You wouldn't feel cheated even if I later told you that when the box started, it had a $1 bill in it, right? Would you feel cheated?
Maybe a little underwhelmed by the $1 bill, but no, not cheated.
Exactly.
Because there was always something.
Our biggest suggestion is a for now answer to buy time until you come up with a good answer is a hugely effective tool. Basically, having some kind of theory of where the story will probably go, what the answers to the questions could be, even if you're not completely impressed with it, gives you the opportunity to, in the future, decide what it is, or decide that you found something better, right? Other pieces came together in the way that Sophie described a minute ago. You're kind of building out that tree, and you're discovering that, oh, actually, this branch over here is exactly what I needed, right? You don't have to give up that opportunity.
I will say that, like, this is... I mean, we are accustomed to writing a serial.
Yeah.
And this is particularly high stakes when you're writing a serial.
100%.
Because it's like, I've already given you the box.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That's
like,
true.
I've already put the box out. Like, I still have access to it. I can still put something out. But, like, I already, like, here's the box.
We put the box out 4 years ago.
Yeah, right? Whereas, like, okay, let's say you're writing a book. Like, you actually get to do all of the behind the scenes work ahead of time before you like put it out into the world.
Yep.
You know, you can always already make sure the $100 bill is in there. However, this is still applicable to your process,
Right.
I think, even if you're writing a one-shot thing that's going to be presented to the world fully formed. So I do think it still applies. It's just, this is something that's very stressful for us.
Do you want to talk about an example of that?
Yes.
We did?
I made this title slide, What Happened to the Ancient Martians, and it made me think of whatever happened to baby Martians. Whatever happened to baby Jane. But then I was like, this is not the crowd for that. That's a very old movie.
I'm not going to lie, I might not be the crowd for that.
I'm my own crowd. Anyway, What Happened to the Ancient Martians? So this is going back to season 1 of the Juniverse. And to prepare for this, we looked up some old planning documents.
Back up.
And that was a trip.
It was wild, the stuff that we forgot that we had planned. The number of $1 bills that y'all almost got. I'm very, very happy we traded those out.
But that's the thing, like, this actually is a process that kind of consistently works, because
Yeah.
if every single time there was a $1 bill and every single time... Well, I mean, you can draw... And maybe you don't think they were $100 bills. Maybe you thought they were
Right.
$2 bills. That is a real thing.
I know.
Anyway, so we went back to our season 1 planning documents to figure out what was originally our plan for all of that world building stuff with the ancient Martians in season 1, in contrast to what it ended up being. So when we were beginning to write the season, we didn't really know that much about them. We knew that they were an ancient civilization that had totally died out before humanity as we know it got to Mars. And so we were like, I guess they had some sort of very advanced technology. We kind of knew that about them. I think we thought about it kind of like Atlantis.
Yeah.
In a way.
Lost civilization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With advanced technology, it somehow got out of their control and they killed each other off, and that's why they no longer... Right, they were all dead by the time humanity arrived. So they killed each other off somehow. I don't know. That's kind of what we started with. So we had something.
We did.
Right? Like, that is an answer to what happened to the ancient Martians. It's not a great one.
No.
It's a $1 answer. So we did have some starting points as we were writing the episodes, things that we did have to say about the ancient Martians, and then it's kind of holding your feet to the fire in a certain way. I think that's what we call it sometimes. Like, you say something about it, and then you're committed to that, and you can explain it any way you want, but that thing still has to be true. So in the very first episode, we learned that Grimm's mask ripped Croesus's head apart. So we know that about the ancient Martians, that they had a device that for some reason can rip a person's head apart. And so then when we're world building, we think to ourselves, okay, so maybe the ancient Martians can split themselves in some way.
Right.
So that's why it's not traumatic for them in the way that it is for a person to put this mask on.
Right.
You know, that was normal to them. That was a normal ritual for them.
Right.
Whereas, like, the only reason it rips his head apart originally is just because it was a gruesome way to die.
Right. I was just looking for an as over the top a murder method as I could describe because I thought it was funny. I didn't know where that sentence is going to end, but here we are.
But then we were stuck with it, right?
Yeah.
We knew that about them. So, okay, maybe they can split themselves in a way. And then another starting point we had later is we were like, oh, it would be really cool if the way Juno learns about Nureyev is through mind reading. So, okay, maybe the ancient Martians had a telepathy pill. And then we put that in, and then we had to stick to it. But then that told us something about them, right? So, okay, if the ancient Martians reproduced by splitting and they could read each other's minds, aren't they all basically the same person?
Right.
Oh, okay, this is very different from what we started with. Like
100%.
this is different and it's much more fleshed out. So our $1 bill was the ancient Martians were sort of like the ancient Egyptians, but with advanced tech, IDK. And what we eventually came to, right, through setting up pieces for ourselves, we didn't know where they were going at the time, but we put the pieces together, and now we have the ancient Martians were genetically identical telepaths who reproduced by budding and ultimately killed themselves, which I think is a $100 idea.
I like it. I still like it a lot.
I still like it a lot, too. And, you know, it was not something that we had planned from the very beginning. That doesn't mean we didn't have anything planned, but we had to build it as we went.
Absolutely.
Which is kind of the point.
And I think that the reason that we're talking about this when we're talking about world building is that, you know, if we had done what people think is the responsible choice, which is to plan everything out ahead of time, then you would have gotten a much flatter version of the ancient Martians, right? We needed to leave those blank spaces on the map so that we could fill them in ways that were more relevant to Juno's situation later on, right? Or just to the story later on.
Right. And I will say, I think this is a little bit relevant to foreshadowing also.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the way it works, at least for us, is not that we have the final thing in mind, and then as we write, we're seeding it early.
Yeah.
A lot of times we're like, oh, we've said some things. How can we make that pay off later?
Absolutely.
Which then after the fact kind of reads as foreshadowing, even though it happened as it.
Right. There are tons of individual threads that we reference in episodes that later come up again, right? There's a joke about Martian rabbits in the first episode, and then Martian rabbits become like actually a major emotional center point towards the end of season 2.
Right.
I saw somebody talking about this, I think maybe on the Discord. We also mentioned Plutonian mind eaters at one point. We never went to Pluto. I don't really want to. So we basically just put all of those seeds down, and then whichever one we're interested in, those are the ones that we grow.
Right. And then that becomes, I think, as a reader or a consumer or a listener, that becomes rewarding because you also have been picking up those seeds. And some of them blossom and some of them don't.
Right. And it allows you to kind of imagine what the world might be like, right? Just because I don't necessarily have an interest in exploring Pluto further doesn't mean that you don't have an interest in thinking about it, right? Third part of our process was asking questions. Once you have a few things set as true about your world, you can start building outwards. This lets you see how things connect, right? So basically what we're doing here, this is kind of something that we showed you before with the building the tree, but I want to show you some kinds of questions you can ask yourself, and then we're going to practice this together, all right? That's going to be fun. Some example character-centric questions. I lost the mouse. But now I've got both hands. Some example character-centric questions. If blank is true for this character, who else might it affect? Right? That's kind of how we got Sir Caroline. We started with Sir Mark and then kind of wondered where...
Right. Talking about the conservative values thing.
Yep. If blank wants something they can't find, where could they find it? What circumstances and surroundings led this character to be the way that they are? Right?
I can't stop touching my head. I'm sorry, I just can't stop.
A freshly buzzed head. You can also ask some world-centric questions. These are certainly not all of them. I'm going to recommend a tool to you later on that actually gets into them more extensively. What happened to this place to make it the way that it is? What do the people believe without thinking? How does that affect their everyday life? what are people talking about right now? Not in general. What is the gossip around town right now?
It was just so nerdy.
I know, but
what is the gossip around?
What is it? What's in all the glad rags? And what metaphors and models do people use to understand their world, job, family, right? So in the Second Citadel, it's, the way that they talk about relationships is two in unity, simple, strong, right? But we have different ways of thinking about our relationships and our families and things like that, right? There's one other thing I want to bring up to you before we start practicing, because it's something that I want you to be. It's another thing that is positioned to us as a rule, but I actually think it's a rule best broken, or a little bit broken. It's true that you want to avoid writing a story that contradicts itself, kind of. But think about how often individual places and people in the real world seem to contradict what we expect, or even what they expect.
Which is something you said back in the character building.
Yep. Nobody is consistent, right? Everybody aspires to be consistent, I think. Maybe not everybody. But many people aspire to be consistent, but I don't think anybody pulls it off. The same is kind of true of places. So this is a quote from Wonderbook by Jeff Vandermeer, which is that big tome I was talking to you about. He has a whole chapter on tips for world building. I highly recommend, if you want to learn more about this, go pick up Wonderbook. You can probably find a PDF of it, so you don't have to go outside. It's excellent. It's really, really good. It has lots of exercises for you to try too. But Vandermeer's quote is, "Much like the individual people who live there, the real world is layered and complex. In a city like London, modern buildings exist next to those from the 1600s, with St. Paul's Cathedral right next to a skyscraper. Similarly, you might in some regions of the world see a farmer using oxen to plow his field while he talks on a cell phone. Places and cultures change over time, and often the past walks side by side with the present. Be careful not to reduce your worldview down to something monolithic that ignores this fact, or you may experience a slow creep towards other generalities and banalities."
I love that.
I know. It's absolutely beautiful, right?
That's super cool.
So you can contradict yourself a little bit, right? We are, in some ways, kind of aping versions of mythology and Arthurian myth, etc., with the Second Citadel. And something that people like to bring up and sometimes yell at us about is that the level of technology there is kind of advanced for a story like that, right? That's very much on purpose, because I think it gives it more identity, and it also is related to the characters in a specific way, right?
So we wanted to talk about an example of contradiction in world building that we sort of built in here. Again, starting with a character as a starting point. If we talk about Sir Caroline, she's a female knight with a chip on her shoulder because other knights won't take her seriously, and you can probably guess what that means, like where you build from there, which is that, okay, the other knights must all or mostly be male, which tells us, okay, so this is a patriarchal society and men are assumed to be the ones in charge. But we wanted to write about a queen and not a king. Like, we just wanted to, in part just because of our own, like, biases and not wanting to put another male authority figure if we didn't have to. So we were like, let's write about a queen.
One of the first things we realized in this story was that if the men are the ones in charge, we had a huge problem with bringing in characters who weren't men whenever we wanted to bring in, like, representatives of the society.
Right. Well, especially because we had started with Sir Mark, and so it was a story about knights.
Exactly.
And in order for Sir Caroline to exist, and I think it's cool that she exists, she's a fun character, in order for her to exist, the other knights have to mostly be male.
Right.
And then we were like, oh no, we're telling a story about knights, they're all male, we're going to have all male characters, right? Like, I think, and this is partly why, like, representation is not always as simple as, like, well, just do it. Like, It does have to make sense for your universe. So it can often be a struggle. But in this case, we decided, okay, we want to write about a queen and not a king, but won't that be a contradiction? Yes, it would, but we did it anyway. Because we decided, okay, the people are just being exceptionalists about this, right? Which is when you say, oh, generally I believe this, but in this one particular circumstance, it's okay. The queen is just special. And something that I find very helpful, and I think, like, this is a check I always try to run before we, like, finalize anything, is does this have precedent? So there's two different types of precedent I will check for. One is historical, one is fictional. So historical precedent is, have comparable situations taken place in real life? Can we look, when we come up with a story or a character idea, particularly if it's going to have a big impact on the universe, I like to think about, okay, so have we seen this kind of thing happen in history? And in this case, the reason why we went with this is because this type of thing absolutely, hang on this slide for a sec. No.
Oh, sorry.
Because this kind of thing absolutely does have historical precedent. There are tons of examples of male-dominated societies with a female ruler.
There are some really, really, really funny writings from Elizabethan England, right? A totally male-dominated society with the queen, that are basically just a bunch of male scholars writing. But she's kind of a dude, right? Like you know what I mean. There's so much academic, you know what I mean, just to back that up, right?
Yes.
It is a contradiction.
Yeah, which is a thing. I mean, and people do this a lot, right? Exceptionalism. So, in this case, historical precedent is what made me feel like, okay, this will work because it's just a true thing. Like, this does happen. I think that another thing that can work is if you check for fictional precedent, which is another way of looking at, if you were in the previous workshop where we talked about how the Moonlit Hermit episode is very much structured on the Beauty and the Beast structure. That's another way of thinking about that, is me checking for fictional precedent.
Right.
Has this happened in stories before? And if it is sort of a common enough fictional trope, again, I'm not anti-trope. Like, it's just how you use them. And if people are really accustomed to stories or characters functioning in a certain way, then it's likely that they're going to accept it, depending on the type of story you're telling, how grounded in realism it is, and so forth. For example, well, we had an argument about this before, about love at first sight.
Yep.
But it doesn't really matter. Like, I don't believe in it. Maybe you do, and that's fine. But even if I don't believe in it, I have seen it happen in stories many, many times. So, like, I get it. And if I see it in a story, depending on the story, if it's like a super grounded, gritty, realistic story, I might not accept it.
Right.
But if it's a little more fairy tale-ish and I see love at first sight and like the violins start to play, like, I know what's happening and I accept it and I move on with the story. So if you feel like you are grounded in fictional precedent, you might be also good to go with a contradiction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, brief summary, because we covered a lot of ground. If you're making a new world, you're planting a seed, not a tree, right? You have to start small and grow out from there. It's super exciting to, like, just start peppering the map all over the place and seeing blank spaces and coloring them in. But those blank spaces are future opportunities for you to have fun, build the perfect situations for your characters, and replace good answers with great ones. You need to treasure and protect blank spaces. That doesn't mean just leave them when you first draw the map. There have been times that Sophie and I, because when we hang out, we spend a ton of time talking about these stories because we're nerds. But there's been a bunch of times where Sophie's asked me a totally reasonable question about
like all
the
my
world,
questions,
and my answer to them has honestly been, I don't want to know that right now. We need to protect that blank space because later on we might need to use it to make an episode work. Right? Find what's most essential, forget the rest, write a good story. Remember that even the world that you build is just in service to the story that you're writing. It does not exist on its own.
It's not real.
It's not real. It is a tool to use to make your story more engaging. So make sure that the world is a useful tool, right? All that said, I want to practice this whole process. So let's make a world together.
Let's make a world.
I have a highly scientific way of going about this, which is this Google Drawing, Google Shapes, whatever it's called, document. And I've got this little arrow here that just says seed.
Cute.
Right? So, Sophie, you and I are going to come up with the seed for this world.
Okay.
And then we're going to ask questions to the chat. So, if you want to go to the live channel of our Discord, that's where we're going to be taking suggestions. Okay? We're going to ask you all questions, and as you answer them, I am going to attempt to draw them on this map.
Okay.
I've never used this Google application
right.
before. So
you are a braver man than I.
Oh, I'm not. I'm terrified. I also do want to say that this premise is based on another game called The Quiet Year. I will have a citation for that because I'm an English teacher. I'll have a citation for that in a sec. But I've sort of used a modified version of that game in my creative writing classes forever. It's a really, really good game for brainstorming, especially brainstorming a place. So this isn't what the game plays like, but that's where I got the idea. So I did want to give credit where credit was due. Okay. Let's talk about the seed. Do you want to start with a character?
Okay.
Let's start off super simple. A character who wants something.
Okay.
Right? Do you have any ideas about who our character is, what they want?
Jan.
Jan.
Just Jan.
Just Jan.
I've been watching Drag Race.
Yeah.
If anyone is keeping up.
All right. I'm gonna have to type. It might make the stream shake a little bit. I'll do my best.
All right. I'm nervous.
Just Jan.
God, you're like balancing things on your legs. It's stressing me out so much.
Oh boy. Okay. Just Jan.
Just Jan.
What does Just Jan want?
Well, I have to come up with the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. She lost her hamster. She's looking for a hamster.
Lost her hamster. As a child, I always pronounced hamster hamster. So I always think there's a P in there. There's not.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That feels like a common thing.
I think it's because of Hampshire. New Hampshire.
Maybe.
She lost her hamster. She's looking for it. All right. This could take place in any world. You've got nothing, right? Tell me something about Jan's world, or I can come up with this one, and then we can. Or actually, no. Let's send this out to all of them. Here's a question I have for you all that you can put your suggestions for in our live channel, right? What is it about this world that makes it particularly difficult for Jan to find her hamster? What is it about this world that makes it particularly difficult for Jan to find her hamster?
What do we know about the world? Okay. Love that.
Oh, all right. Can you give that credit while I write it down?
Yes. Davis says hamsters are illegal.
Hamsters are illegal.
You know, that's so cool. Like, I just went from my boring, dumb idea to like, okay, you have my attention. This is interesting now. Hamsters are illegal.
But hamsters are illegal. For now, I'm just going to put in text, and when we get to, like, places, I'll probably specify further. Here, I'm going to move this up so we have more room. So our seed was just Jan lost her hamsters looking for it, but hamsters are illegal. Sophie, do you have a question about a world in which hamsters are illegal?
A question about it.
Yeah.
Why?
Why are they illegal? Right? Hamsters are illegal. I'm gonna draw a bad jail cell while you all get to that. Our question is, why are hamsters illegal? Any ideas that you have, you can put.
Oh my god. People are like...
Heck yeah.
Yeah, this is great. Okay, what about this one?
We have hamsters. So Redbird says, hamsters are exotic and an invasive species, and if Jan gets out, it might collapse the ecosystem. I like this a lot.
Oh my god, and then, right, now we're like building stakes like crazy.
Right.
Because there's like her personal stakes.
Yep.
Of trying to find the hamster, like all dovetailed together with massive stakes of if she doesn't find it, it might collapse the ecosystem.
Or the ecosystem.
This is brilliant.
All right. Now I'm going to ask a question. Sophie, you and I are going to take turns asking questions.
Okay.
That is my attempt at a jail cell because y'all answered way faster than I was ready for. Hamsters are exotic and invasive. They could destroy the ecosystem. Okay, so now I want to know about the ecosystem of this place, right? If we're going to make the audience care about this place, it had better be an ecosystem that we actually want to survive, right? If this was like, if this all took place in a swamp where the only animal around was a deeply ugly frog, no, that sounds adorable, actually.
I love him.
All right. You can't use that one. But once we have specifics about this place and about this ecosystem, the stakes start to matter. So my question for you is, what is this ecosystem like? What will the hamsters destroy within the ecosystem?
I'm a deeply ugly frog. They be chewing.
Oh man, this is why I shouldn't give examples because I'm seeing a lot of we want frog. Okay.
There's so much.
Okay. No, we just took one from that person. Okay, I saw one from. Oh no, can you scroll up?
Mm-hmm.
I saw one from the other Sophie. Any pronouns that says that there is a rare species of cabbage that the hamsters love. Now here's the hard part. We got pretty invested in the hamsters.
Mm-hmm.
What's so special about the cabbage? You gotta make me care about the cabbage, right? Do you want to give that a shot, or should we ask the chat?
Let's ask the chat.
What's so special about the cabbage? There's a rare cabbage that the hamsters eat. This one, I think I can beat y'all in a race. I'm gonna draw a cabbage real quick. There, that's a cabbage.
Oh. Jeez Louise.
Major terraforming crop. That's tea with dragons. So what does that say to you, Seth? Because you pulled it out.
Oh, I don't know. Like, I think that. Well, okay. First of all, we're on another planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big one.
So we have to terraform.
The fact that our sci-fi series takes place on Mars is just something that I surprised you with.
Yeah, it was just like a random thing.
Yeah, that was just
like, also, it's on Mars.
Right, so that means...
And I was like, that sounds dumb, but all right.
This takes place on another planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have that, right? We can... So I think you can see from this process how you could keep on going down there, right? What's the planet? Why are people inhabiting it? Etc. And so you started with a lost hamster, and you ended up with a space opera.
Yeah, and it started so boring. You know what I mean? Like, that was just a dumb, boring idea, but like... I don't know.
Right.
Just from building outwards,
and
you can get so much.
And everything connects. That's the important thing, right? Everything connects. So let's actually take a step back real quick and see what will happen if we add some more detail to one of the things that we've already established, right? Hamsters are illegal. I want to know about the legal system of this place, right? What kind of punishment do you get if it is found that you have a hamster? What kind of punishment do you get if it's found that you have a hamster? That's my question.
And like, we may not get into it right now, but I think it's worth pointing out that like you could also grab any of these points to build another character from.
Yep.
Okay, who works in the legal system? You know?
Who's the hamster DA?
Who? Like, that sounds like a character I want to hear about.
Oh my god, yes. I'm a special prosecutor in charge of hamster issues. Punishment for hamster ownership.
Oh god. You all are sick! Sick! Several people have said expelled from the planet.
Expelled from the planet.
Yikes! That was like the least gruesome thing anybody said.
Right.
I think a few people said it. I see it from Cassie.
What's so good about the planet? Why wouldn't you want to leave? So Jan they find out that Jan has a hamster. Jan and her hamster go to another planet. Why do we care? Right? Tell me something that the audience will get invested in terms of the planet.
Well, I think that could be a world building thing, or it could be a character thing.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think that we've hopefully gotten across throughout this is that, and throughout all of these, is that all these things seriously connect, right? It's part of the reason that actually, as a like classroom teacher, I don't do like PowerPoint slides very often, but I do it when we're talking about this because it's pretty hard to fence everything off so it's not referencing everything else, right? So I always have to plan it ahead of time.
Okay, I'm not taking this answer, but it is incredibly funny to me from Koo. Is that how you say that, Sue?
Yeah, that looks right.
Every other near planet is very alt-right. Okay, that's super funny. But actually, this is a simple one, but I really like it. From Ray Not Today Logic. Her crush is on her planet.
Jan's crush is on the planet.
That's a great reason.
And boom, we have a new seed, We have a new tree that's growing. Right now, we get to find out about Jan's crush. What's Jan's crush's problem? Why is
The hamster DA.
Jan's crush the hamster DA?
Yeah, now we have built-in conflict.
Yes. Right? And so all the pieces come together. Right? Again, we got like a whole space opera out of just Jan losing her hamster. Right? If we took out all of this stuff, don't panic. I'm gonna control Z
Throw
in
it
a
in
second.
the garbage.
Yeah, if we took out all of this stuff, we could have gone a million ways with that. We went sci-fi. It could be literally anything, right? One distinction that Jeff Vandermeer makes in Wonder Book that I think is really worth talking about, and then we'll probably wrap up this exercise and start doing some questions, is that even if you are writing in the real world, you're still world building. You do not have a machine that converts the world into words. When you are writing about the world, you are presenting your audience with your version of it. You are creating a world. That means that what you establish as the rules of reality kind of subconsciously end up being what the audience expects from you, right? So anything that we've talked about today also helps you out if your interest is not towards fantasy, sci-fi, or more fantastical things, right? It can also help you out if you want to write about the real world, right? What aspects of the real world are you going to cover? Because again, it's way too big for you to cover everything. So what are you going to focus on? I think that's about it for our exercise, huh? All right.
That was really good.
Yeah, this is
I love
sick.
this. And like, it's sad, a little sad to me every time because we like collectively come up with something that I'm really invested in, and then that's it.
Yep. Let me name it Jan, and we'll put that for you all to have access to sometime soon. So we made a world together. You're stuck at home, so you might as well do this work.
I'm not tired of it.
I know, the bit gets you every
Funny
time.
AF.
I've thought about changing it, but I know I betray my audience. They're my audience. So all of this works together this week, right? I want you to try to play a game similar to our exercise today with your group. Leave huge blank spaces on your map. If you want to pick up the Quiet Year and you want to try to play that with your group, that works great. If you just want to look at the prompts that the Quiet Year uses, that could also be a great way to do it.
Unsponsored content. This seems really sponsored.
I am very, very grateful to that game because I use it a lot in my creative writing classes, and it tends to even get kids who are not invested in building a world interested in the process of it, right? It sort of trains you in creativity through small questions. That's what I really like about it. Have each member of your group write a short vignette based in that world, centered around one character. Invent new things to suit your character. And I did not write this down, but don't tell the rest of your group what you're writing. This needs to be your secret to start. Then come back to your group and compare your vignettes. Is this all still the same world? Why or why not? How do all these pieces fit together? My guess is that if you all end up coming to contradictions, many of them are just going to raise even more interesting questions, right? And if you want us to shout out and give some feedback on your suggestion, we'll pick one for next week. You can submit a summary of your world and conversation to the submit channel on Discord.
That was really embarrassing. Watching you do a hashtag.
Hashtag submit.
Oh my god. Please stop.
These are works cited. You'll also get access to this. The Quiet Years by Avery Alder. Like I said, Dungeon Worlds by Sage Latour and Adam Coble. And if you want to check out Wonder Book, that's by Jeff Vandermeer. But I think it's time for questions. We're just about at 3, and we have definitely started progressing these towards being longer than an hour. But that's fine with me. So
what are we doing?
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, a lot, but...
So if you have any questions, we draw those specifically from the live channel in Discord. So if you want to head over there and ask those, we're going to try to prioritize questions that are about this topic if we can. So whatever you have, as soon as you get them, we'll start talking.
This is, I think, maybe relevant to the assignment.
Relevant to the assignment. Do we start with a character like Jen and then use that character in our stories? Or so when you're doing that exercise together, you can start with a character, you can start with a concept or an idea, right? Just have one small seed. When you go and write your stories, you're all probably going to want to write about different characters within that space, right? Otherwise, this gets muddied with characterization too. So build a world together, leave a lot of blank spaces, and then tell everybody to go off and write a vignette exploring a different part of that world. Okay?
How do you apply this template onto more contemporary stories?
How do you apply this template onto more contemporary stories? Um,
Well, I mean, in a certain way, you don't have to as
mhm,
much. I mean, this is world building. It's for when you need to build a world.
mhm.
So I think the only sense in which you do need to do that is like, you can think of like more local and micro kind
Yeah,
of. So your world building might be like, what are this family's values?
yeah,
And they're not going to be like completely made up and fantastical.
yeah,
They're going to be a lot more grounded, but I think you can use the same process and just keep it like much more smaller, right? You're not
yeah,
trying to build the planet. We have a planet,
yeah.
but you're writing about a particular person,
Right.
you know.
I also think the details you choose to focus on end up looking
Mm-hmm.
kind of similar to this. For some reason, the book I'm really thinking about right now is Her Fearful Symmetry by
Hmm.
Audrey Niffenegger,
Mm-hmm.
which centers around an actual cemetery in London, I believe. Yeah?
I think so.
And it's an actual place, but the author chooses specific locations and concepts and events related to that place to really focus on. And so in that way, she is building a world for the audience. It's just one that happens to already exist,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you can just think about it how like you have a world, right?
Yep.
Like my world is a little bit different from Kevin's world because I
Right.
focus on different things, right?
Yep.
Okay, so how do you know when to stop world building and start writing?
It's a good, I mean, one of the big things that we kept coming back to today is that we kept on starting writing way earlier in the process than you'd think, and then seems responsible, to be completely honest. Um, like when we started when I started drafting the Juno series, pretty much all we had was Depressed by PI
Hmm.
on Patel.
Yeah, and then you were like, it's on Mars.
Yeah, on Mars I just threw in because I thought it'd be fun. And so I think that ultimately, how much you have prepared ahead of time is a matter of style. You can get away with preparing extremely little if you are willing to go back and revise later, right? Remember that when you write it, it's a living text, so your draft is not the final draft. You can go back and fix it if it ends up being inconsistent.
Um, how do you backtrack to a seed when you already have? Oh, sorry, I wasn't saying who's asking these things. Convoluted Machine is asking, how do you backtrack to a seed when you already have plot points you know you want to include?
You've helped me out a lot, and we've talked together a lot about. This seems like a very macro level story thing. Do you have
Hmm.
any big suggestions for this?
I'm actually struggling to wrap my mind around the question.
So I think that oh, you know what? In this case, the plot moment that you're thinking of, the image or whatever it is, might actually be the seed, right? If the one thing you know about the story is that this takes place in it, then you can build outwards with like, what is a world like in which this can take place? Who are the people that I'm imagining in this space, etc. Right? So the seed does not need to be a character. It can be an event. It can be a conflict. It can be a concept.
Yeah,
Right?
and any of those things that you came to along the way, you can also
Yeah.
just go from there, I think. I don't know if that answered the question. I'm sorry if it didn't. How do you come up with place names?
How
I love coming up with place names.
do you come up with place names?
Well, I mean, I don't I think that in I don't think this is fair for me to be asked the question because I think you come up with more of the place names.
That's true.
I probably come up with more of the character names.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah, it's pretty consistent, isn't it?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's because we pre-plan character names and we don't necessarily pre-plan place names. So you
Right.
just come up with them in the moment.
Right.
Sometimes you can like similarly to like a seed and then it branching out, sometimes like you come up with one thing and then you're like, I'm gonna go with that theme.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are like towns in the Second Citadel, right? There's
Yep.
like Ballast and Milltown.
Ballast, Quarry, Milltown. I
Yeah,
think,
and
are the three villages that are referenced.
they just have to do with like what they do in that place.
Exactly. And the reason for that is literally just we had a story that was going to take place near a lake, and I needed to come up with something so I could write my 1,000 words for the day, and I picked a watery word.
So really, this is the answer to how does Kevin come up with place names, which I think is fine because there's no one answer to that. I mean, everyone's going to do it differently. That's just what
I think
Kevin
the
does.
thing that makes those names satisfying is that they're internally consistent, right? When you hear ballast, you have a sense it has to do with water. When you hear quarry, it's got something to do with rocks. When you hear Milltown, it's got something to do with trees.
Cecil asks, what do you do if you realize things start to contradict themselves? How would you backtrack on your building without wanting to just give up? This makes me want to cry. This happens a lot.
Yes, and like in our process too.
Well, right. It happens to us a lot, and we do want to just give up, but we can't because we already started the show.
We made the promise. We have to keep the promise.
Right. So we have to like be accountable to that. But no, I can't tell you how many times it's happened that we've like gone down a road and like put episodes out and then been like, oh no, this doesn't make any sense.
Oh yeah, no, we say this like it's all super easy and like we always do it right, but I'd say we mess up most of the time.
It's horrific.
Yeah, oh absolutely.
It's so stressful.
Yeah, that's true. There are a couple different methods for that, right? Our situation of writing a serial like we do, I think, is actually one of the hardest versions of this because we can't go back and change earlier details without making our audience extremely upset. Reasonably, right? You got invested in those details. Even when we redid our first episode, I needed to make sure that everything came out to the same solution so that all of it was still canonical. That was awful. That's what happens when you don't leave blank spaces, and it's a nightmare. So, if you are writing something all in one go, or if you're writing all of your episodes ahead of time, or something like that, you can always go back earlier in the process and change details and set things up. Sophie and I were talking about a little earlier how our initial plan for Miasma, the main villain of season 1 of Juno, was both very simple and bad. It turned out that her motive didn't really make sense with what she was doing because we had kind of started with multiple seeds and they didn't really connect, right? So when we were revising, when I was drafting Final Resting Place, the last episode of the season, Train from Nowhere still had not been recorded. And so I kept on, in a panic, going back to scene 1 of Train from Nowhere.
Adding more things.
To add details to set things up for Final Resting Place. So that is another way in which, your plan needs to be flexible, and while you're drafting, you're going to find out your plan doesn't work. That's inevitable. You need to be able to adjust it for that. You need to be able to go back and revise chunks of it for that.
Stolen City was another one that you kept going back to and being like, oh my god, we have to add a thing.
Oh, I think every season we've had like an 11th hour episode.
Well, yeah, right. I guess it's because it's the penultimate story arc, and you're like, oh my god, we need to tie everything up, so like we have to have, this is our last chance to do setup.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you want...
We're coming up on that, actually, in our writing process soon.
I live in fear. And as per usual, like, you don't get to know anything, but we have the last like 2-parter of the Juno series figured out. Like, we know what is going to happen. The one before that, we have ideas, and some of them are good, and a lot of them aren't.
Woo!
But we have to trust the process because it's always worked out for us in the past. We know it'll work out again.
Yeah.
It's just terrifying.
Yeah, it's scary.
And we live in fear.
I hope that was a helpful answer.
When you talk about writing, it's super fun. When you do it, it's deeply horrifying.
How do you develop the rules for technology? Oh, this is from a tired Pan today. How do you develop the rules for technology? How do you establish what can and cannot happen in Hyperion City? Why is the Theia Spectrum plausible, but the Ruby 7 a wonder? So some of it is, I mean, I think a lot of questions are kind of just go back to this process about, okay, you just start with some seeds and then build out from there. And in terms of the seeds, though, kind of all that comes down to is just what are you personally interested in?
Yeah.
And like there are just the only answer for stuff like that is, well, we were interested in certain types of technology.
Yeah.
And not interested in other types.
Right. And so very early on, my first pitch to you for Prince of Mars, for our second, before it was called Prince of Mars, for our second Juno Steel story, the client was going to be some kind of AI, right? And we had an argument about that. And your points, which were very good, is that AI implies so much else about the rest of the world and how it works that that's a gigantic can of worms.
Yeah, that I just like really wasn't ready for.
Yeah. So just by making that decision, we changed the world, right? One tip that I'll give you real quick before we move on to our next question is if you have distinctions like that, that's a place where setups and payoffs can really help out. If this is something that you want to hear about in the future, you can request it on the Discord. But even in Prince of Mars, where at the end the solution to the mystery has to do with teleporter technology, the only way that we can make that work is to find a way to slide in earlier someone suggesting teleporter technology and someone else saying that was a nuts idea, right? We need to be able to set that up.
Can we just... Because of the way you said that.
Oh, okay. I think I misspoke. The Juno series isn't ending yet. Don't worry. We're talking about this season.
The season finale.
The season finale. We have the season.
It's cool.
Yeah. Oh boy.
The chat like exploded for a second.
Yeah.
This is a good question, but I don't know that it's very relevant.
Not yet.
That feels like our final workshop.
Oh, people are taking deep breaths. I'm seeing a lot of good deep sighs.
Yes.
Now.
Sorry. This is interesting.
Pluto as a planet asks, how do you create monsters/animals that seem like they're naturally tied into your world? That's a good question.
Yeah, that is interesting. Well, I mean, I think that the process was a lot more thoughtful in Second Citadel than in Juno. Like, I think the process with Juno is like just as haphazard as it seems like it is in terms of like creatures.
Yeah.
Because it'll just be like, yep, there's rabbits in them, there's sewers, like, and then we just go with it, and it comes across as silly because it is.
Yep.
And I think that like contributes to the cartoony vibe.
Yeah.
Because it's just totally silly, and then sometimes, but then I'm actually thinking about the peepers, which I think it was because of something somebody said. Kat said something, and we thought it was really funny.
Oh, right.
And then we like built from that.
Yeah,
so
Kat was the first one who said peeper.
Yeah, it was because there was like some, like in the Prince of Mars or something. It was like something I put into the background sound design.
Right.
And she was like, "Oh, peepers." And then, like, Kevin just kind of latched onto that.
Right.
And was like, "Oh my God, what if peepers are?"
Right. I think that another thing that leads us to also is that like they are pretty haphazard in the Juno series, but we established that pretty early on so that it feels like an internal logic to the world.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Once we establish giant sewer bunnies, it's like you know that where anything goes. Another thing that I try to do, which is more related to audio, but I think it is helpful in any context, is I try to make it usually that either in the name there is something that gives you something to imagine, or there's a very, very quick pitch for it, right? When I say giant sewer rabbit, you have something to imagine. Right. When I say giant sewer Gognor, you're just question marks in your head, right? There's nothing to actually imagine.
Right. That's a good point.
And I could spend a bunch of time describing the rabbits, and later on we do. But if it's just for a one-off bit, nobody wants to spend that much time on a joke, right?
Do you want to just do a couple more?
Yeah, we can do like 2 more.
Okay. This is interesting. I don't know. I kind of want to address that in a workshop almost.
Yeah, I think that's a separate topic.
Oh, Kevin came up with Vala's Vicky's Vixen Valley.
Yeah.
And then I loved it so much. Well, because you just said it randomly in Prince of Mars, and then I loved it so much that I was like, what if we meet her?
And even that, like, the seed that it came from was like, we're on Mars. I looked up structures on Mars. There's the Valles Marineris, and then I was like, if there's a business from the Valles Marineris, what is it going to sound? How can we make it sound like catchy, right?
How do you write a technically sci-fi story but avoid the science part?
It's a good question.
That is a good question.
Do you want to say who asked the question?
Oh, yeah. That's from Shriyazism. I mean, there's like a very specific genre called speculative fiction.
Yep.
I think where you're more expected to like figure everything out. I do not think that in sci-fi you have to figure everything out, like
Yeah.
how everything works. And I think that if you don't, well, maybe this isn't. I was going to use Star Wars as an example because I think that like we like to talk about how Star Wars is actually fantasy,
Fantasy in space.
just pretending to be sci-fi,
Mm-hmm.
and they do explain some things, but a lot of stuff it's just like yeah, here's this big thing like. We don't know how it works, and we really don't care.
Part of the reason that Star Wars is a good example is because in the prequels they try to turn it into science fiction, and they try to start backing up some of the just crazy things from the original movies with some kind of scientific basis, right? That's where the midi-chlorians come from. And the fact is that like you can usually get away with it literally just because like I'm willing to bet that almost everybody, or no, if you're watching this, you have a computer or a phone, right? That is true. How does your computer or phone work? So how is this? How is this sending our image? We have no idea, and we're living in this world, right? Because you are following a person in the world. Chances are pretty good they don't know how most of this stuff works, right? So establishing what it's like for them to live in the world is more important than establishing how the world literally works, right? You're not writing a manual for an engineer. You're writing a tale about somebody's life.
All right, this one I'm going to take just because we can answer it immediately. If from Chocolate Cakers, great name. If a person is world building, but sorry, if a person where'd it go?
Oh, it ran away. Go up, go up.
Was it up?
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah, I think you got bumped all the way to the bottom of the chat.
I don't see it here. Whatever. I think I remember the question.
Yeah, summarize it if it was.
Yeah, it was if you have multiple protagonists, would the process be the same, building outwards from each character and what they bring to the table? Yes, it would be.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why I wanted to take that question. Okay, maybe one more. How do you make sure you don't steal too much from other fictional worlds / make your world too similar to a specific established world? My answer to that is worry about the first one and don't worry about the second one.
Yep.
Like just don't steal a world, you know. But if you are authentically building from, you know, your own seeds and what you're interested in, and it ends up being like another established world, I don't care. That's
Right.
not stealing, and it's fine. Tell your own story. Like, I don't know. I think like we don't really worry too much about that because I'm sure like and we often get people being like, oh, did you get this from that thing? Were you thinking of this? You know, I listened to this other podcast and they did the same thing, and it's like it's just coincidence. Like different people come up with the same ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's only so many things,
Right.
in so many different combinations, and so I would say just don't worry about if you create a thing authentically and then you're like, oh my god, I just found out it's similar to this other thing. I don't care.
Right. And I also think if you steal from a lot of different places and find ways to make them all connect, like with the trees that we were talking about today, you end up making something that kind of has its own identity, right? When we set up some of the rules for Magic in the Second Citadel, which we've begun to explain but haven't fully been explained, even though we understand it. What?
I don't know. It just sounds like, well, we understand.
No, it's just like it hasn't been relevant yet, right? So we're leaving it as a blank space in the canon.
Yeah, no, you're right.
So we were not completely original in that, right? It's referencing other kinds of stories that we really like. But because that's combined with like, you know, really gets a medical drama, and like it's combined with a bunch of other influences that we have, it is a little harder to trace each individual influence, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Do you think that should be it?
I think that should be it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. So we're going to make sure that that presentation and our story about Jan end up with access to you all. Yeah, make sure that you submit anything that you'd like us to take a look at.
Yep. So submissions in the submit channel. I mean, I expect to get those, you know, in about a week before the next workshop. And there's always the topic request channel if there's something that you'd like us to cover. Just so you know, there are like certain topics that have already been suggested that we would like to get to, but we're not quite ready yet. Like we want to establish some building blocks first before we get there. But feel free to keep putting in requests. Definitely check out the GoFundMe that we talked about at the beginning, if you have a little money to give. I think that's it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sophie.
And thank me. Stuck with me, stuck with me. You're still stuck with me. I love that you can literally stare into the camera.
Yep. I've been waiting for this day my whole life. And thank you, everybody, for coming and join us. If you're not part of the Discord, join the Discord.
It's not too late to join the Discord, to join a group. Absolutely not. So
Sarah's been helping people find groups and things like that.
So there's someone to help you in there if you need.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. And we will see you again next Saturday at 2 o'clock for Writing Fiction Across the Void.
Yay! Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.